So welcome everyone. This is a time for users of NeSI's platforms to talk to us and ask us questions about the current state and the new platforms. Just before we get started, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping. So we're here on obviously a large communal video call, a webinar. So we'll ask you all to mute your microphones, please, your audio, and leave them on mute unless you're actually involved in a question. That'll just help us all deal with the sound. If you do have a question, one of the most effective ways to get it acknowledged is to follow the link, put it to there and write it down in the shared document. That'll give you the opportunity as well to see what other people are asking. And you might find actually that you've got a common interest. We'll also have team members, there's many of the NeSI team are in the room at the moment, and they'll be working in that document to answer questions as we go along as well. So that should become a very useful resource for you. We'll share it with you at the end of the conference, at the end of the webinar as well. If you've got a longer question, please do wait until the Q&A at the end, and then we can work through whatever questions might be outstanding at that point in time. And as I mentioned, we'll share materials with you at the end. Do note that this is being recorded. We noted this during the registration and the invite. So if you don't want to be seen, just turn your camera off. If you don't want to be heard, then please do not speak. But you have got the Q&A document. You can still get your question answered and responded to, even if you don't want to be seen or heard. Okay. So in terms of what we're looking to cover off today, it's a very light presentation. We've shared with you in advance a recording of a more detailed presentation from earlier in this series of seminars. So we're making the assumption that you've had time to review that presentation, that recording. If you haven't, and you're looking for more detailed information, that's a good place to start. And also, we can share some links off to more detailed documentation on our websites. So we'll cover off where we're going at the moment, the milestones, migrations, and user training, and then we'll finish off the session, which will be the bulk of our time together, looking at your questions and seeing what we can do to answer. Okay, so we'll get underway. Just so we're all on the same page in terms of what we're talking about, noting that some of you might not have had a time to review the earlier seminars, talking about the new platforms that we're putting in place in NeSI. So this is a quick summary of where we're going. If you've been an active user of NeSI, then you would have been running your projects in the recent year on either Pan or Fitzroy. And so you'll either fit in either or both of the left or right columns. And the final state that we're looking at in an April-May timeframe is the bottom, is Mahuika and Maui. So Mahuika being the replacement for Pan and Maui being the replacement for Fitzroy. We're in the middle at the moment. We've got Pan still operating on the left, and we've got Kupe operating on the right. So those of you that were on Fitzroy, you'll already know about Kupe, and then we're working through the migration across to the final two systems over the coming months. So that's the context that we're sitting in. In terms of the systems that we're talking about, we've got some more detailed information here on Maui and Mahuika. The key here is that these came out of the design that we did based on the National Platforms Framework Review that Michael Udstrom led back in late 2015, which established the future needs and demand case to drive our HPC investment. So these have come directly from the goals that we set through that National Platforms Framework Review process, driven by the science needs in the country. They are two different types of HPC and supercomputer respectively, integrated around the same shared storage, with both high performance storage there as well as hierarchical storage or archival storage. There's a lot of similarity between the two environments, and that's been one of the key design goals, is to make this as easy to use as possible for researchers. And that's driven by, as much as possible, having common operating environments for the end users. Not operating systems, but the way we think about naming things, the logical aspect of names, the tooling environments that are there, the way you access these systems is common, and the shared storage provides a common place for your data using the same project directories and those sorts of things. There are some differences in performance, both at the level of the chipsets, the CPUs, the network interconnect, and then some of the specialized nodes or functions. And you can see on the left, for example, there's a huge memory node at 4 terabytes, and on the right, you can see that there's a specialized advanced data analytics environment. Both have GPUs, both have remote virtualization. Both will support interactive use cases for virtual laboratories. The other thing to note here is that Mahuika is in service 100% for NeSI, and Maui is in service 57% for NeSI. So as well as providing in this new platform environment a consolidated infrastructure hosted at one site and integrated around a high-performance data environment, we also have partnered with NeSI on their operational requirements, and so the Maui supercomputer is going to perform both NeSI service and on the other 43% of its time, NeSI operations service. Michael, I called you out as being the man responsible for this design, which is a wonderful step forward for us as a country and as a science system. Have you got any comments you want to make at this point?
You just said it'll be available for 50% of the time for NeSI, 50% of the resources at any one time are available for NeSI, so it's not as though we'll get it for two different. No, I think there's no. I guess the main features here, if you think about it, is a shared file system between, or shared storage and file systems between these two supercomputers, and also ensuring that the programming environments on both, while not identical, are very similar. And so if you're, let's say you're a Maui user and you want to use Mahuika, you'll be in a familiar environment, and likewise in the other direction. I guess the only thing that people who are particularly concerned about this will need to be aware of is that we're running with CentOS on Mahuika on all of the nodes, and on a supercomputer we have SLAs on the login nodes and a very cut down form of SLAs on the compute node. So, for example, every job you run on Maui will use static linking, and so you will not be doing dynamic linking on those compute nodes. The purpose being to reduce the jitter on the network.
Yeah.
More detail than you really wanted to hear.
That's right. Well, I'm sure there'll be some interest in the room, so and maybe we can pick up those sorts of references off to that sort of information over time as well. So in terms of where we're at, we've been through in the last few months the setup, the transition into Coupe, the migration into Coupe. This was not a small task. Significant, as you can see there, amount of data, 5 petabytes of data, 100 software packages pulled across. And in January we had the honour of decommissioning Fitzroy. Fitzroy's performed exceptional service in the sector over the last period of time. 7 years, Michael, or what was it, 8?
Fitzroy served for 7.5 years, nearly 8.
Yeah. So it's performed a wonderful job at that time and was still performing admirably at the end. So very pleased with the design and the outcomes from Fitzroy. Moving forward, we're looking at currently, now that we've decommissioned Fitzroy, we're doing some work on the data centre at Greta Point to make it fit for purpose for Maui and Mahuika. We'll be moving into training on the new platforms in a March-May timeframe, and we'll have full service from Maui and Mahuika, we believe, in early May. And so obviously the user migrations will fit in with training and then commissioning the full service in May. So there's that link to watch the website as we track our progress on the website. And any comments there from you, Mike, from a project perspective? You're looking after the delivery of this whole thing?
We're in a planning phase at the moment and looking at some learnings from the Fitzroy Coupe migration. So we'll in the very near future, we'll have some more definite dates around the training and the migration and what it means for users.
Correct. So moving on to the migration itself then. So as you said, we're working through some of the details of that. Timelines. We'll be communicating with people via email, establishing exactly when migration dates are going to be confirmed, how we move the data and software across. As Michael's pointed out already, the operating systems and the way that software is linked and compiled, etc., might need some change. We do have some information on the way that's working on Coupe already, and so you'll get a sense for where we're heading by looking at that training and FAQ documentation, and we'll certainly share the links to those documents with you when we send out the record of this session. And maybe I don't think they're in the Q&A document, but maybe someone could paste them in there, even if that would be useful for some people. And lastly, there will be some fairly basic things that everyone will have to do, such as the changes to SSH. If you're working with data transfer technologies, we have baked into the infrastructure this time around sorry, if you could all mute, thanks. The Globus data transfer platform, and so that provides a very mature, high-performance environment for moving data, and we'll also have secure copy. And we're happy to talk about data transfer and some of those technologies and approaches in the Q&A. But obviously, as we're going into a consolidated environment at one data center, increasingly we're finding that the data transfer is going to be a key integration point to support workflows on and off the environment. Some people do that by hand, some people have programmatically scripted it via APIs, etc. So making sure that this centralized set of infrastructure supports the sort of service interfaces, the service models, the workflow models that you need as researchers is going to be a key part of the discussion, and data transfer is essential to that. So then just moving on to user training. So we'll be doing user training around the country in this online mode. So we'll cover off how to get started on these new systems, and you can see there the sort of topics that we're talking about. It's the very much a hands-on style approach, supported by our team, the technical experts in our team, and applying the documentation that we have, which has worked examples, etc., so we can work through each of these things and demystify them and build everyone's comfort levels around the new environments. And then moving into part two, we'll look at some more advanced topics around building code and the sort of support we have in terms of the programming environments across the Maui, the Craig C, and Mahuika, the Craig CS environments. And as Michael said, they're not identical, but they're similar. And there are some key differences. So we really want to make sure that we've rehearsed those and everyone's feeling confident about it. As Mike said, some of those dates will come out soon. So that's the very high level summary of where we've been and where we're going. And we really want to open the floor at this point. There is a document in the background there that people are entering in their Q&As into, and I can see a whole lot of questions in there. So what we'll do at this point is go into that document. If you perhaps, I think you've shared the link, have you, Janet, via the chat in Zoom? Can you just confirm it for me, Mike?
Yeah, and I'll share it again.
Yeah, and so if everyone could head across there, we'll then move into a completely different mode of looking at the Q&As in the document and looking at any conversation we need around them. So starting at the top, we're looking at the current timeline. So here we're talking about HPC1, which is, in other words, Mahuika, but both HPC1 and 2, being Mahuika and Maui, are coming online at the same time, early May this year. So here, the next one's around storage. If we've got large amounts of data to store, what are our options? And certainly in the presentation, we talked about the shared storage environment, and what we've identified through the last period for NeSI's investment in infrastructure is that we didn't have included in the core NeSI infrastructure the ability to deal with very large volumes of data over time for specific research communities. And the responsibility there was for researchers to bring the data in and bring it out from the working environments on our systems, and for the institutions to look after the large-scale data problems, which obviously at that point becomes a data transfer challenge, and then there's also performance issues related to workflows at that point. So the new environment has both high performance, a significant 8.7 petabytes of high performance parallel file system storage, but it also has a tape-based archive system that's capable of storing up to 60 petabytes of data. And we'll have that populated with tapes on a demand basis. We'll certainly start with 6 or 7 petabytes, I think it is. That will be replicated across 2 sites across Wellington and Auckland, and it'll be able to be explicitly accessed and used by projects that need to place large amounts of data next to the supercomputers, and then where the workflow can bring the appropriate amount of data onto the supercomputer for a particular job to run at a point in time. There's some work for us to do in that space around policy and some other things, but certainly the capability is going to be there from day one. We're very excited about that. We'll try and moderate our excitement in terms of how we roll it out, and we really want to make sure it works really well for the research communities that need it. Was there any further comment from anyone on the team on that, or any refinement to the question from the person who posed it?
I just thought I'd say we might need to have a conversation about this at some point. It was me that posed that question, but that might happen at the level above me, so I can't really talk about that too much at the moment.
No, fair enough, Ben. Thanks for that. And I think this is an area where we know some of the workflows haven't worked well for your work in the past. We really want to make sure that this does.
Great, thank you. And yeah, thanks for your answers, everyone. That's been really good.
Great, thanks. So the next one we're looking at is, let me just have a quick read of this. Pretty advanced about this kind of access.
The part 2 one. No.
Oh, it's part 2.
Yeah, and there's a part 3.
Yeah,
so they're all to do with storage.
So to do with the storage and the policy piece, which I've already covered. Okay, great. So I think we will follow up, Ben, around that. That's an important piece for us. So the next one's around virtual labs. What will they look like? How will access work, and how available will they be? So we do want to approach this very deliberately. We consider the sort of virtual laboratory environments to be what we would call well curated. So we're not looking to be an infrastructure as a service provider of virtual machines, for example, as you might find in the cloud. These are places where well-known requirements can be placed, where data analysis is required, where the data required for analysis is, perhaps needs some interactive analysis and visualization, some exploratory analysis, etc. But it's the data sets that are shared in the HPC workflows, and so it's driven by that need for performance and scale somewhere in the overall workflow. The first candidates for these sorts of things are the bigger research communities, and we've already established some of those as we migrate off Fitzroy, because there are a bunch of virtual labs supporting some of the work that goes on at NeSI, and so that's allowed us to build up this environment. And we're in discussions with, for example, Genomics Aotearoa around genomics virtual laboratory, supporting genomics workflows. There's good exemplars of those coming out of other national infrastructures like the Nectar infrastructure in Australia. And we've done some 4 training sessions actually based on the Nectar virtual laboratory, which seems to be working quite well. So think of these as sort of common shared environments where research groups that are coming together nationally might have some shared needs that integrate around the data and the HPC workflows. We're very keen to hear from people that feel like they might have something like that sort of use case, and our definition of the use case isn't locked down. So we do want it to be tested. We want to understand what your needs are. So come to us with your needs in that space if you're keen to work with us. We appreciate that we're not the software developers, and you might be working with other partners in terms of developing the solution. This is about the operational environment that you can deploy it into, and the performance you can get from it, the integration in terms of the workflow. Any other comments or questions on that one? Picking up on the second part of that, yes, there will be visualization capabilities available, and again, hosted in that same environment, and the availability, timing-wise, we have the environment from go live of the systems. The availability is constrained by the need to work with the community to develop and meet their needs. So it's really around the lead time for working together to put in place an appropriate solution. Okay, so moving on to the next one. So storage options. There's some commentary there. Perhaps someone in the team could put a couple of links off to, in particular, the training documents around Coupe, which I believe have some decent, fuller description of the storage environments.
All of that information is in the top of the document. I put in the link to the training.
Great, thank you, Michael. Excellent. Yeah, so if you go there into that Coupe section, you'll be able to find the information. There's also, Michael, there's a slightly different version of that, which I'll just paste down below your one as well for people. That's less code oriented and more documentation oriented. That one there. It's the same information, just presented slightly differently. Okay, so then moving from storage, we have talked in the storage area around the archive and those sorts of things as well. So assuming that's we're good with that. Looking at compiling and running Fortran. So again, there's the linkage off to the page that looks at Fortran. So take a look at that. If there's more information required, come back to us, please. I would like to be updated on accounts access. So I was never able to connect to the new system successfully. I've not tried again recently. So this is around the user migration. So I think we've got information there, but I can't remember who asked that question. But if I think we'll follow up. We've got that question recorded from the registration questions. We'll follow up with that person directly as a team to try and figure out what challenges, what problems you were having on Coupe, and how we can make that, how we can solve them for you. GPUs, so there's mention of the GPUs there. There's a question around TensorFlow, so that's a software environment that I'd assume we'll be looking to deploy on the new systems given time, and that'll be driven by requests for that sort of software support through project requests, project proposals that come through our standard processes. And certainly it's possible to run TensorFlow on the new platforms. So GPUs again, will there be specific queues? So there's a response there around, we do have some decisions to make around the queuing structures at the moment, and whether we have separate queues for specialised resources like GPUs and how we manage those. So watch this space, we haven't got an answer for you today. There's nothing specific to comment on in terms of Spectre meltdown at this point. And again, as I'm going through, sing out if you have further comment. Next one's looking at Coupe and looking at a particular model. And I think we've got a reasonable response there. So can you help? So I think, as they say there, if you've got a very specific problem like that, we've got a fantastic support desk. The team are really responsive around any issues you might be having. So please capture your information there, send it through to support at NeSI. The good thing there as well is that gives us a good history of the sort of challenges people are having, and we'll be looking to triage that those conversations into knowledge base articles and further documentation over time as well, so we can share that back out with the wider user base. Commercial software licenses. So we do have commercial software licenses in place at the moment based on institutional licensing typically. And so if an institution has purchased commercial licenses and they can be placed on a shared resource that isn't necessarily owned by that institution, so there are some constraints in the world of licensing, as I'm sure many of you know, then we can have shared licenses. We've got ways of putting that in place at the moment. It's probably, as the response suggests, a case-by-case response is required because it comes down to the constraints of the specific commercial license that might be in place. And there are quite some differences, in fact. But we will list off the software that we have under management and that is installed on the platforms proactively, and the licensing situation for that software. We haven't got that in place just yet, but as we go through the next few months, that'll be a key part of the documentation that we add in to NeSI. And the next one's talking about a specific application. Is there any available documentation for preparing for running R on Mawika? There's probably elements of training and documentation, and I'll let someone else in the team provide a specific pointer on that. So we've run through a fairly high level and fast clip the Q&As that are there at the moment, and I can see some answers emerging as some new questions emerge. So there's a question around how are the new queues being sorted and proposed, and so maybe Michael, I'll throw that one to you to give an off-the-cuff response to. It's really a question, I think, around, I suspect, around our philosophy and principles around structuring the queues.
Yeah, I guess this is a question. The answer to this question will raise probably as many questions as I answer. So I recognise that. Yeah. I guess the plans for well, as we have implemented on Coupe, and as we at this point we're planning to implement on Maui and Mawika, is to make the queuing structure much more explicit, so users will actually request resources directly through particular petitions on the machine or quality of services. And the reason for that really is to make clearer to users, or help them to understand the answer to the question, why is my job not running? And so in this particular case, we're planning to make it explicit to users. So if you want for example, a debug, if you want your job to run in a debug queue, then you will submit it to, Slim doesn't have queues, it has petitions and has other ways of managing it, but you will submit your job to that debug queue, and rather than have, at the moment, for example, on PAN, you tend to submit the job, and behind the submission script, there's a whole bunch of management goes on to figure out where your job ends up. But if you submit your job with the wrong, you think you're going to run it in debug queue, but you give it the wrong parameters. Maybe you gave it a 30-minute runtime, whereas the actual queue limit was 20 minutes. And you're expecting to come out in 10 minutes time, and 3 hours later it hasn't showed up. It's because it went into a general queue rather than into debug queue. So I think the present philosophy is to try and make this more explicit. There's some mix here between convenience and explicit, and that will probably take a little while to figure out how best to achieve that. But that's, I think, philosophically, the idea presently is to make it less automagical and a bit more explicit for users. So there'll be a bit of training involved, but many overseas sites do this, and it's easy to demonstrate what's needed by sticking it at the table. So the new documentation, and we'll put on the website for the new machines, will have this somewhat, will have it explicitly stated for you. And I realise, as I say, I probably raised as many questions in people's minds as I've answered, but that's essentially the fundamental idea.
Yeah, well, I think it's important.
Overlaid on top of this, of course, is fair share and backfill and all sorts of other things which will enable us to make use of the machine as efficiently as possible.
Yes, I think the principle we're looking for there, Michael, is that we do want to make it quite explicit how the queues are operating and the impact on an individual job or a user, so that we can have a shared expectation, and we can debate that expectation over time. But we want to make it very, very clear what's going on, and so we do anticipate putting up more information around the queues, the wait times, utilization, all these sorts of things, for both publicly and then at a more detailed level for people who are logged in, including metrics around their jobs and those sorts of things as well. It's a really key area, we believe.
Yeah, I guess it's worth commenting on that in the sense that if you look at, say, if anybody bothers to go and look at, say, maybe the NeSI status of Raygun at any point in time, you can get a sense of how busy the machine is and what kind of jobs are running on it and which queues are full and so on. Or if you go and look at maybe Archer, which is the UK machine, you can figure out what the wait time is as a function of job size. And what our plan is to put onto the NeSI website the same kind of information, so that users can get a quick view of how the machines are running presently, and indeed why their job might be taking longer than they might have hoped it to take, or why it came out faster than they thought it might have taken. So it's really, I guess, the key desire here is to make things a bit more explicit, but to provide, which means there'll be some user training required in order to get them to use these new features, but also to provide more information to help you understand how machines are actually running.
Okay, so we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. The rate of new questions has dwindled down to a complete stall So just an encouragement there. If you've got a question, now's a good time to get in. You won't be competing for anyone's attention. Is there anyone that wants to put their hand up and ask a question rather than write it into the document? Very happy for you to unmute your microphone and just raise your hand. Okay, great. I'll not prolong that uncomfortable silence much longer. Thank you very much for coming along today. It was a pleasure to talk with you all. And we'll follow up with the shared resources that we've been presenting and that we've made reference to. The recording of the session will be available, and we'll be back in touch around some of those next steps around training and the next sort of update webinar as well. All right, so thanks everyone. Great to see you.